Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We will give everybody a minute or two to join. But I'm so excited to be joined by these amazing authors for what promises to be a very intriguing and interesting chat. So thank you all for being here. All right, so it is 11 on the dot, Eastern time, that is. So I'll start by introducing myself and then introduce each one of these fantastic authors. So thank you. Thank you again for being here. My name is Mariel Ebrahimi. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Disrupt CRE, all about emerging trends and technology in commercial real estate. My sweet spot and point of most interest in the industry is the office asset class. And so I've had the pleasure of participating in seeing a little bit behind the scenes of this great book. I know we have this great blur feature on, but excited for today, finally being the day. An amazing feat. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our wonderful authors. So Bob Johansen is a distinguished fellow at the Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley. He's the author or co-author of 12 books, including Full Spectrum Thinking, I know much of which has influenced what is in Office Shock, which we'll get into. Joseph Press, a former workplace designer, transformation expert, and futures architect. He's the lead author of Ideals, Innovation and Design as Leadership, and co-founder of the consulting cooperative Make Our Future. Amazing. And Christine Bullen is an information systems professor who pioneered in assessing the strategic business value of computers while she was at MIT. Amazing. And I've been fortunate enough to get to know each of you a little bit, if not even by way of this amazing series that's been put on in the last couple of weeks. So with that, we'll do something a little unconventional. We have 3 amazing parts of this book, and we're going to jump right to part 3 and kick it off with you, Chris, and talk about the now. The now is what gets a lot of attention. It's what people are focused on, and we want to, help everybody understand how you have helped shape the now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us to help us on our book launch. We're all very excited. The buildup has been amazing. And I hope that we'll really be able to let people know what's in our book today and get them excited about it. Part 3, we talk about what we hope will be a better future for working and living in the office, in the knowledge work area. And we do this from three perspectives. As individuals, we have concerns about our work and where it's going. As leaders in an organization, we have concerns about the organization and how we are going to steer it in the right direction. And the community person that we need to think about, we can think about in a variety of communities, local ones, national ones, but things we do in the larger community are also going to have a very significant impact. And just as an example, we're going to talk about the fact that we have 7 very important areas we want people to think about. We call them spectrums. And one of them is on climate impacts. And this is something that I think everyone is thinking about today. And as an individual, you might say, I want to examine my consumption of things in this world. Do I consume too much? Why am I consuming so much? Can I change that? If we look at it from an organizational point of view, organizations have the opportunity to be part of the circular economy. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that term, but the broad concept is we don't go from creating something to discarding it. We look at a circular view, which says something is created, born, has a life and then has a new life. So it's not cradle to grave, it's birth to rebirth. And organizations have an opportunity to really be involved in that. And from a community point of view, communities can talk about how they can be regenerative in terms of our planet. Yes, we have to cut what we're doing. We need to take our emissions to zero as soon as possible. But we have to do more than that. We have to talk about how do we actually make our planet regenerate and be better, and not it's not just not damaging it, it's making it better. So those are our three examples of how the three different views are expressed in the book.
That's amazing, Christine. And there's each of the spectrums lends itself to being able to do better in so many different aspects of not just workplace, but culture at large and community as individuals, as businesses. And so before we get into all of the nuances of the spectrum, I would like to add a little poll and just understand if you guys are thinking about office shock and what we're talking about here as an individual, as a business or organization, through the eyes of a community, or potentially a combination of all. So we hopefully can share that link in the live comments. All right, so we'll just take a second for that link to populate in the comments. But in the meantime, we do talk about these spectrums in a lot of different fashions, be it through individual, community, combination of all. And so maybe we can jump right into either the spectrums. Joseph, if you want to go ahead and chat with us and let us know about the different spectrums. Or we can ask the audience to put in the comments, what kind of perspective they have, if it's individual or more organizational. Oh, here's the, so if you're watching from YouTube, you can see the poll right now. There's a link in the chat. So go ahead and take a minute and let us know how you are considering the content that we're talking about. So we'll give everybody a minute to fill that out.
Well, people are filling that out. I notice there's an interesting question we have, and for me, so I could quickly comment on that. The question is, my view on whether planet should be prioritized before, ahead of people, as in planet, people, and then profit. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think that we are concerned that of all of the possible outcomes of the future, what's happening in terms of climate impact is one of the most important. I wouldn't say that I would put that a priority ahead of people, but I would definitely say that it's something that we need to be very clearly focused on in order to make sure that we have a future for our children and grandchildren that will be a good one.
So I see that you guys on LinkedIn can't see the link in the comment box. That's okay. I'm going to show you the results, just from some folks who are participating via YouTube. We can chat out loud about the implications of this. Oh, perfect. Yes. So great. People can see it on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to take a minute, we'll add the results to the stream right now, and it will update live, and we can talk about the results. You guys all have a little bit of a different perspective of how you're considering your answer. So this is very interesting. Many as an individual, and we talk about how more and more, people will be seeing, these spectrums, this book, the content of it, as a combination of many of, the above. Amazing. So if you haven't had a chance, you can fill out this this poll at any time. We'll have one more throughout the chat. But this just to get a sense of who you guys are and what your perspective is and how you're engaging with us in this book.
Yeah, I think this is a great distribution. It's really interesting to see good numbers in all the categories.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys for participating in that and helping connect with us in this way. I do want to, talk to Bob about, you've written many books, 12 books. And, we talk about the spectrum of thinking, and I know there are some principles of that in Office Shock, but what is different about this moment? Why now for this book? It's a big question, but I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, it sure is. Thanks, Marielle. And we started writing this book in the middle of the COVID shutdown and the COVID crisis, and people were talking about the Great Resignation. And then the term was the Great Reset. And then the term was quiet quitting. So there's been all these different ways of framing it. And as we looked at it, we realized that it's about much more than when can we go back to the office? It's really about why have an office at all? And what we realized as futurists, thinking future back from 10 years out, is this is a great opportunity. So it isn't just the Great Resignation or the Great Reset. It's a great opportunity. And it's an opportunity for individuals. It's an opportunity for organizations. And it's an opportunity for communities, for society. But it has to be realized as an opportunity, not just as a threat. And what we try to do in the book is to face up to what we call Office Shock, kind of with a hat tip to Alvin Toffler and the original work that he did called Future Shock. This is a big future shock, and it's an abrupt shift in how, when, where, and even why we work. And it's an opportunity to rethink all those basic questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Bob. And I think that's a great place to, go right into the different spectrums. And, we want to kind of now trickle back to how did we get to this moment of this great importance. And Joseph, if you can, in your work as a futurist and recovering architect, I know work today and a lot of this approach is very different from, the work you did 25 years ago. And so what are you seeing now? How did we get here? And not just over the last 25 years, but in a short amount of time as a result of COVID and how that's changed so many things.
Yeah, it's amazing how the great opportunity, as Bob mentioned, emerged relatively quickly because of the shocks, because of COVID, because of the awareness of social inequalities, movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too, playing a significant role in opening up this great opportunity, in addition to climate crises, as Chris mentioned. So there's really a convergence of a number of components, but all of it was enabled because of more than 25 years of technology development. And we know that Zoom has been around for a while. Teams has been around a little bit less, but has been in development. But many of the platforms have been around. But really the convergence of those shocks open up this great opportunity. And there was also significant disruptions in the real estate market, as you know. For example, WeWork. So the whole rise of co-working spaces as an alternative space between the office and an online platform has significantly increased. Even, for example, the important role that Starbucks has played. By having free Wi-Fi in Starbucks 15, 20 years ago, all of a sudden that turned a coffee house into a co-working space. So there have been a number of significant evolutions that have really converged in this period, which we're calling Office Shock. And frankly, I wish I was, an architect with these great opportunities, because now we have the chance to have more holistic conversations, what Bob refers to as more full spectrum conversations. And those spectrums where we should be having discussions, where we need to make choices, very much in the space, what Chris was saying, some of those hard choices, for example, about climate, well, there are a few others in addition to climate and in addition to when and where we work. There's number one question about why do we work? What is the purpose of our working? Are we working because we need to fulfill our own needs, developing a career, for example, creating your own organization, a startup, for example? Those are going to be more individual focused purpose, but then there is that collective purpose. And collective purpose, organizations and communities with more collective purpose are actually demonstrated to have more healthier environments. The Blue Zone Project, for example, the Mediterranean diet, those are all examples of where community purpose is actually helping people to feel more fulfilled and actually live more healthier lives. The second spectrum is about economic outcomes. And interesting, I'm dialing in from Switzerland, and tomorrow I'll be going to the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos. I'm not going to be rubbing elbows with all the who's and who's there, but going to see what is that balance between what WF refers to as stakeholder capitalism in comparison to shareholder capitalism, which is more driven around purpose. Stakeholder capitalism is a bit vague, and in the book, we've brought in some wonderful examples from economists like Mariana Mazzucato to talk about what concretely might that mean, where we take into consideration others outside of a company. The third topic, as Chris mentioned, climate. So we'll move to the fourth, which is belonging. And belonging, we're really looking at the natural tendency to work with people who are more familiar to ourselves, that look the same, sound the same, dress the same, have similar backgrounds, to working with others who are different. And as diversity, inclusion, and belonging becomes top of mind, we are really looking at how might we encourage everyone to celebrate uniqueness, because that's the way that we're going to be able to break down the boundaries of belonging that are separating us from creating more belonging. The next spectrum looks at how might technology increase and augment our ability to interact. So this is a great example of being augmented by technology. Artificial intelligence and platforms like ChatGPT are changing the way that we think about our interface with machines. Do we want to use machines in a way that help increase our creativity, like in the example of AI art generators like DALL-E 2, to help decision making as well? Or do we have this dystopian view that we might be replaced by machines? So again, looking across the spectrum is going to be important to be able to make some of those choices to increase the augmentation to make better futures for working and living. And then we've got our final one on agility. So breaking down the boundaries of organizations, being able to use gaming in ways that bring groups together, individuals who have a common interest, to be able to achieve a shared objective. So the agility spectrum, are we going to stay within our fixed structures, that org chart that we all know, or are we going to be going in the direction of what the Institute of the Future refers to as shape-shifting organizations, where they are much more fluid? We do also refer to this concept of a braided organization as well. So those are the 7 spectrums of choice. Those are 7 real experiences that are coming. That's part of part 2. What next? And as futurists, we're seeing signals across all of these spectrums that all leaders need to be taking into consideration when thinking about how might we take this great opportunity to create better futures for working and living.
I'm smiling because it's such an incredible time to be in this industry where information like this is not only shared, but really celebrated. And I just remember even 9 years ago when I started Disrupt CRE, we just didn't have conversation like this and talking about the what and why in such a holistic and meaningful way. So this is just so wonderful. And I've even read Office Shock, and so I know how wonderful it is, but to hear it from you guys now is just even that much more special. So
I have to add something here.
yeah, please do, Christine.
Joseph, you were outlining the 7 spectrums and you forgot one.
Which one?
Place.
Go ahead.
I intentionally skipped over that one.
Okay, good. You want to explain why?
I'm happy to do so. So the reason being, I mentioned earlier the changes in the real estate market and the workplace, the emergence of WeWork, Starbucks. That's really clearly outlined the spectrum between being in an office and being at home. And in the book, and I think, Chris, this is an important point that you raise, in the book, we refer to this archipelago of workplace choices as the office-verse. Yes, we were inspired by the metaverse, knowing that virtual reality is going to be increasingly one of those options. However, we wanted to really put forth this idea that all organizations, all individuals and communities should be looking across the spectrum of the office first to be able to make choices of when and where will we gather to work, which we refer to in the book as officing. So it's really encouraging that mindset of an office first. Well, you should be having that conversation about where and when do we work, what makes the most sense for our objectives. And if we only stick to the question, do we go back to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week? Are we at home 2 days a week or 3 days a week? Are we as productive as home? If we only stay within that spectrum of questions, we'll be missing out on this great strategic opportunity.
I want to make mention, we did put a second poll in the chat. Some of you had said that participant limit was exceeded. We opened that up. So this question is all about the spectrums that Joseph has kindly outlined, these amazing 7 spectrums that make up the framework for thinking about Office Shock, and for many other things, potentially, depending on your life and your business. And so, great, I see it's working for all of you. So if you just take a minute, and what we're asking you is to rank these spectrums in a scheme of priority. So if you go ahead and you should see it both on LinkedIn and YouTube, wherever you're watching, go ahead and take a minute and we'll get the results up on the screen so we can chat about it.
And Marielle, it was important to identify that we started by looking 10 years ahead, where most of the books about Office Shock focus on the now. What we've done is look 10 years ahead and said, what are those external future forces, those big drivers that are bigger than all of us? And what does that suggest about the 7 spectrums of choice? So we're not predicting the future. We're provoking your insight. And we're giving you these 7 spectrums of choice as a framework for making your choices. Now, part of our future back view was to look back from the present. So we actually include a 50-year back at the history of the development of office systems. And that's what led us to coin this new word, the office verse. We really got stuck on the conversation about the metaverse and whether the metaverse is attempting to be commercialized, which we don't think will happen, but we decided not to use the word metaverse, but to coin a new word, the office verse, to talk about the offices being the buildings, the officing being the process, the ways we work, and the office verse being what's going to be created over the next decade. So the 7 spectrums of choice are in order, beginning with why an office at all and ending with agility, but they are in order, but they're all provoked from that future back view.
Right. And so, and I do after we see the poll results, I want to give a brief context of the process and how you guys created part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the book. The nature
Great.
of that thinking, I think, is so important. And frankly, I think it's one of the more unique things about this book, although there are many. But I want to make sure we can show everybody the results of this really interesting poll.
Wow.
All over the board. Yeah, really. Wow, Christine, huh?
It looks like something we created on Midjourney.
It's colorful. Do you guys want to reflect on this a little bit? Is it interesting? What runs through your head when you see this?
Well, I'm really excited to see that purpose is a very high priority, the highest, because we're seeing, when we're doing the research for the book, we're seeing a lot of people asking that question, particularly younger people who want to be working in an environment where they feel it helps their personal purpose and that they want to be contributing, not just earning a salary. But I think being slammed home with the COVID requirements to work from home got a lot of people thinking about why do I go to an office anyway? Where is the value in that? How is it helping me support my personal purpose and the purpose of the organization? So it's really, really good to see that one.
Yeah, I'm actually encouraged by these results, and it's very consistent with our belief that this conversation about office shock and about offices, officing and the office first, it's a strategic conversation, not just an operational one. But if you look at the popular press, it's all about when do we go back to the office and quiet quitting and all the kind of downsides and operational concerns, which are real, but the opportunity is strategic, and it always starts with why an office at all. And there are good reasons for that. There are things like orientation and trust building and renewal and team building, early stage creativity, culture building. But many of today's offices aren't very good at that. So we need to ask, what are the purpose and how do you design physical offices? Because I do believe that physical offices will continue to be important, but we have to ask why. What is it that they're doing? And it should be a question asked, not an assumption made.
I'd also like to comment on the the high bump for augmentation. There was an article today in the New York Times about universities being very concerned about ChatGPT and students using that to write papers as opposed to writing them themselves. And we've heard this, obviously. What was interesting to me is the number of professors in schools who are thinking about using ChatGPT to augment their students' experience of writing and discussing topics. So one professor was actually proposing that they would have a discussion about a topic and they would ask ChatGPT's opinion to add it to the discussion. And that's the kind of augmentation that we are really excited about. How can technology help us do what we're doing better? Not replace us, but do it better.
I love it, Christine. And that gives a level of critical thinking and agility and kind of, as well as place and time, because ChatGPT is very much this place and time, right? So I do want to give a chance, and Bob, I'll call on you for this, although anybody feel free to jump in. Like, I really do want to understand for the audience this sequencing of thought that you guys have designed the book, Future Back Thinking. It's not something that people are naturally going to be familiar with. It's right. Something that you guys are introducing that's very unique, and it is a methodology of thought. So what is Future Back Thinking?
Yeah, so it began in our book called Full Spectrum Thinking, and it was realizing that we're so stuck with labeling and categorizing, and categories coerce, and we find they're useful for some things, but not if they're unfair and not if they're inaccurate. And it turns out that our tools for full spectrum thinking are getting much better. So this is the ability to think across gradients of possibility, not just in binary ways, across gradients of possibility, while resisting the temptations of labeling, resisting the temptations of categorizing, resisting the temptations of certainty. So thinking in full spectrum ways. And in many ways, binary computing is the ultimate categorization. Everything is a 0 or a 1, but we're moving toward a world of quantum. It's going to take a while, but it's the world of full spectrum thinking. And we're already seeing tools like big data analytics, big data visualization, machine learning, gameful engagement, blockchain, which are really distributed authority, and also that ability to see across gradients of possibility, to think in full spectrum ways. So what we wanted to do is to get beyond the crisis that we were in terms of the COVID shutdowns, to get beyond the crisis and think future back. Okay, how do we work? When do we work? Where do we work? Why do we work? And how might we reimagine that, thinking future back? And then, we're humble futurists. We're not telling people what to do. We're not even predicting the future. We're just saying, here's the waves of change and here's where we're going. And then we're giving you a framework for choice making. And it turned out, as we looked at many of these different spectrums of choice, that there actually is an order. You really should begin with, why do you want an office at all? What's the question there? And work through the basics of outcomes, of impacts, of belonging, of augmentation, of where and when, and finally of agility. There is an order. There is an order to this. And it's a profound strategic process of applying future back thinking, applying full spectrum thinking to the choices of where, when, how, and even why we work.
Thank you, Bob. And I think it brings me to just a consideration that what you guys have outlined in this book is so much greater than workplace and office. I think people, they read Office Shock as the title and they're thinking this is made for somebody who makes decisions in an office. And that's just so far from the case here. You really have all of these different spectrums of thinking, and you use office and workplace as kind of the vehicle to bring it together. But Joseph, what are those factors in getting to that kind of nucleus as the office and workplace itself?
I really think the key is Joe Lee put in the chat that what we're proposing in Office Shock requires a mindset shift from leaders and organizations. So yes, there is definitely a mindset shift to be able to think full spectrum. And practically what we aim to do in the book is to have those 7 spectrum and to encourage thinking across them. We sometimes refer to that as systems thinking. But as you pointed out, Malia, these spectrum are so big, they're so important, that number one, there has to be the ability to see them. And that is why we decided to use music as our inspiration. And we use the mixing board as an inspirational metaphor to visualize how might you be able to make the connections between those spectrum, those choices. Thank you, Chris. So the idea of the mixing board is, again, an aid to be able to address that first key point, thinking full spectrum. The second point, and Bob, you touched on this as well, thinking future back. And what Joe pointed out in her comment is the importance of being able to see things differently, to be creative in the approaches. And the way that we applied future back thinking, the 3 steps, relatively straightforward: what future, what next, what now. We applied that by having young artists across the globe illustrate a future with more purpose, a future with more outcomes, a future with less climate impacts. And that's a wonderful artist from Belgium who created an illustration of a more future punk regenerative office where you see gardens and this blending between agricultural and corporate activities happening. as an inspirational illustration of a future. And we had the opportunity, or I had the opportunity, is in my role as a recovering workplace architect, to use Midjourney and AI art generator to create an illustration of that office first. The point here is that, to Bob's insight, we actually know that illustrating the future is something that we need to be augmenting. We need to be doing more of that, because helping that mindset shift, helping all leaders be able to think about the future to overcome their present focus, which is neurologically built in. Those are our biases. So we actually encourage illustration, we encourage creativity, we encourage envisioning and imagination as part of that what future, to then set up a conversation around those choices of what's next. Will our economies be more circular, as Chris pointed out? Will we be working with people who are different? So what are those experiences? That's what's next. And then we have an opportunity to make some of those choices and have those spectrum laid out about what now. So those are kind of, I think, the two really important aspects that we try to bring in to help. And I'm really happy, Joe, you mentioned that in the chat, to encourage that mindset shift.
And this, Joseph, it's really important to see the book as a conversation starter. And we're using the polling in the same way here. It's not a systematic survey research thing. It's a conversation starter. And we think that's what has to happen now. Start a conversation, and it's actually a strategic conversation. So most of the interest in the book so far has come from chief human resource officers because of talent, because of productivity, because of retention. We think the conversation has to involve commercial real estate, obviously, and Marielle, that's why we ask you to host this. But it should also involve the CEO, and ultimately it should involve the board. This is a really important decision. It's how we're going to work in the future. And we've got a unique opportunity, a unique window to do a better job of redesigning how we work and redesigning how we live.
And don't forget about the CIOs.
Good point. It has to be the CIOs too. Yeah.
Well, you see so many more business units becoming involved in these decisions, which is amazing. I mean, and it's a short period of time over the last handful of years that you've started to see those connections become stronger. So like I said, an amazing time to be in this industry. I know a lot of people may not feel that way, but I mean, just from hearing more from the three of you, there's no question. I do want to touch on two particular spectrums, and I'd love for Christine and Bob, if you could each, give us a little bit on each one. And maybe Christine, we'll start with you. I would love to talk a little bit about climate and SDGs. Before we jump in, I want to make mention, we see all your questions in the comments. Thank you guys so much for engaging. I hope we have a few minutes at the end to pick out a couple, but we will jump into these two spectrums and then hopefully have some time to answer some of those. So Christine, climate is such an important and big topic.
Yes.
I know it could be its whole own webinar in and of itself, but give us
right. Everybody else can leave now.
Right.
No, clearly the climate impact is critical. It's the question of our ability to live on this planet in the future. It was interesting to see in the poll, it was a little bit hard because the climate color was light green, but it was still very in the high priority area. And again, I'm very, very glad to see that. Clearly, there's an enormous amount of debate with believers and non-believers, but I'm definitely in the let's look at the facts category. And the facts are clear. We have got to change what we're doing, and we have to change in all of the three areas we talk about. As individuals, we really have to examine what we are doing with the environment. At Institute for the Future, there's a very interesting group called Urgent Optimists, and it's run by Jane McGonigal, who is brilliant and has proposed scenarios for the future. And one of them is called Zerophoria, where you wake up in a world where there's no more garbage collection, there's no more recycling. You have to figure out how to obtain, use, and dispose of things without that kind of system behind it.
Wow.
And we're having discussions about that in the near future. And I think that's going to be fascinating because, as much as we as individuals would like to do the right thing, when we buy things, we have no control over how they get to us. We have no control over getting rid of plastic because the stuff arrives at our doorstep in plastic. And the recycling, as we all know, is not at all reliable. So that's, as individuals, it's an issue. In organizations, it's a huge issue. Negative impacts on the climate start with the building of a new building. And a really interesting question is, how can we stop doing that? How can we repurpose buildings? And that's one part of it. Another part of it is, how can we create technologies to make the building of buildings and homes have less of a negative impact on the climate. And from an organizational point of view, it's very hard to get the world to decide to do something. The UN has proposed 17 Sustainable Development Goals, many of which deal with climate impacts. And we are hoping to see more and more companies adopt those goals and use them as, what we say in the book, North Stars to aim for creating a better future. A very interesting example happened recently where there's a country in South America where a lot of the lithium comes from for lithium ion batteries. And it has such a major impact on that country and its people that they put together a group to create a new constitution that actually included concerns about that as part of the constitution. Unfortunately, that did not succeed, but I see it as a very interesting signal of how even at the country level, we can see people trying to have a positive impact on the climate.
I mean, this is a massive topic, and we certainly talk about it a lot in commercial real estate. The commercial real estate and construction waste industry is contributing to between 38 and 40% over just my career in the last 9 years of global carbon emissions. It's a massive issue, and I think the more we see people in the office decision-making world start to care about this, we see tenants and occupants start to strategize in a smart, more meaningful way when considering a lot of these spectrums that you guys bring to light, the quicker we can reach some of these massive goals. I mean, it's an industry with a lot of power with, sometimes I like the urgent optimist. I love that, that title. That's amazing. But just even working with a handful of real estate professionals that have some of these global portfolios of buildings, sometimes it just takes that one right person to hear a talk like this and consider their strategy in a little bit of a different framework. So just thank you, Christine. Amazing topic. And just as amazing of a topic is another spectrum of belonging, a huge, huge, huge topic, not just in office, but in culture at large. And Bob, would you share a little bit about the belonging spectrum as it relates to workplace strategy?
Sure. So the question here is, with whom do you want to office? With whom do you want to work? And if you go in an old-fashioned office, a traditional office, often people all look alike. They dress in the same way, they talk in the same way, they're from similar backgrounds. But if you think future back, the future is going to be radically more diverse. We're going to have much more diversity out there, and that's really a given. So the question is, how do you design a work environment that designs for difference? So the spectrum here is from the familiar to the different. And what we say in the book is you want to have intentional difference that's really designed for diversity, designed for linking diversity to productivity, to a sense of belonging, to a sense of equity, to a sense of inclusion. And, as I was reflecting on this conversation, we talked with one of the world's leading diversity consultants, Ibrahim Jackson, who will be working with us in a follow-up session here for LinkedIn Lives. And Ibrahim's conversation kind of reminded me, I went to divinity school and studied world religions before I did my PhD. And I went to the divinity school Martin Luther King went to, and I was there when he was killed. And I was able to work with some of his former professors. And the big takeaway was that his clarity of intent was all around social justice. It wasn't just racial equity. It actually included poverty and included environment, it included an anti-Vietnam War kind of stance, all because his intent, and we talk about this in the book as flexive intent. His intent was social justice, not just racial equity. So I think what we need to do with regard to the belonging spectrum is design what's our intent? With whom do we want to office? What's the intent with regard to belonging, equity, inclusion, diversity? What's the intent? And then execute our work environments with flexibility.
Wonderful.
It's also interesting to note that today is National Racial Healing Day. And we talk about that in the book as well. And I think it's a nice coincidence that we're having our book launch on the same day.
I think it's very appropriate. I would love to jump to some questions, if that's okay with everyone. We have quite a few really, really interesting questions. First, as insight into the gut-brain axis continues to increase, I'm curious as to how the views on the impact of food on employee moods, cognition, and behaviors might evolve in 10 years through a full spectrum thinking lens. Wow.
Yeah, it's just so important. So one of the new leadership literacies I talk about is the ability to create and sustain positive energy. And we include that in our agility spectrum. Essentially, we all have to be corporate athletes. We all have to be physically, mentally, and even spiritually grounded in the face of this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and it's going to get more so. So physical health and nutrition is an important part of that. Physical health and mental health. It's great news that the next decade, finally, neuroscience has gotten practical. So we understand a lot more about our brains now. We understand a lot more about health. And it's interesting, Joseph mentioned Blue Zones. During the COVID shutdown, one of the conclusions, one of the updates out of the Blue Zones work was that purpose-driven people are happier, healthier, and live up to 7 years longer. People who work for purpose-driven organizations live up to 14 years longer, and the organizations perform better. So the beginning of health is actually what we eat. And that's also the beginning of creating an agile and a healthy and a sustainable work environment, an office verse, if you will.
I love this topic. And I think just in the last couple of years, we've started to see mental health be a major conversation that's happening amongst workplace professionals, which is incredible.
Yeah, it can be. The office verse can be healthier. It can be mental health better. However, that doesn't apply. It's not fair. So the shutdown and the work at home, that works great if you've got a good place to work, or if you don't have kids running around, or if you don't have aging parents to care for. But it's unfair. It's unfair. And I think we can do a lot better. So the mental health potential of the office verse is high, but we've got to design for that and design that in. It won't just happen.
Sure. Fascinating question. Let's take another one. How should one avoid information overloading when thinking full spectrum? This is also a great question. There's so many things to consider.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just in a podcast last week about exactly this topic. Ross Dawson in Australia runs an information overload podcast. And it's really interesting that his first question about avoiding overload is purpose. Decide on your purpose. And once you decide on your purpose, then you're not just doing desk scrolling of the latest media reports, you're linking it to your purpose and you're filtering around that. So if you line up our 7 spectrums of choice, this is basically a way to help you avoid information overload and get kind of pulled into the more operational conversation and to filter. But we need full spectrum filters to avoid that kind of information overload. But it all goes back to purpose. It all goes back to flexive intent. You've got to get that right first, or information overload will be inevitable.
So we have another one that's, it's very interesting. So this is from Rodney, a great question. I also wonder if we look ahead 100 years instead of 10 years, how will our conversations change? And I can't wait to hear what you guys say about this one.
Yeah. So this question of how far to look is a critical one. 10 years is the sweet spot because it is far enough out to get up beyond the normal planning horizon, but close enough in to be practical. I actually like 100 years for certain things, and we have done 100-year forecasts. The last one we did was for the UK government about tech futures, looking 100
Wow.
years. We did one on food health and food security that was 30 years out. So I think it's feasible. 100 years, you're really getting down to the basics then. It's hard to do expert opinion aggregation at 100 years, but it certainly can help to clarify your purpose.
This next one is also interesting. These are all amazing questions. But Joseph, maybe you can take this one. The conversation I hear in leadership teams have shifted from how many chairs to how do we collaborate? So the question really is, how do we facilitate the conversations to the next themes? Great question.
Yeah, very good. And I saw Jeffer post that one. Jeffer's also a recovering architect designer. So
You're amongst friends.
Exactly. So, our biases will always be to use the opportunity to collaborate and to co-create as a way to build the trust, to build the awareness, to achieve what we talk about in part 3 of the book, the synchronization. So going back to our metaphors and synchronizing between those individual choices, the organizational choices, and the community choices. Well, it's really by creating the trust, creating the understanding, having that level of synchronicity that then creates a platform or the space, the safe space, to be able to ask those questions about, well, what is our purpose? The hard question, are we only aiming for profit or are we aiming for prosperity as part of the spectrum of outcomes? And so on and so forth. And even some of the hard choices that Chris, you mentioned about climate, particularly the individual carbon footprint. Well, that's also very much connected to the carbon footprint of organizations and companies specifically that are spending millions of dollars or whatever currency you may be using to be able to increase consumption, because that's what's going to drive bottom line profit. So I think the key question here, when you move away from the chairs and the desks and how many people do you fit in, and again, are you there 2 days a week? Are you there 3 days a week? How do we collaborate? Well, you've got to have, as Bob said, that flexive intent. You've got to have a shared view of that future to be able to say, well, we actually do want to have more circular practices in our organization. We actually want to change the production, consumption, unholy alliance, if you will. We actually want to bring in people who are different, even though that's going to feel at the beginning uncomfortable. So those are, I think, really the opportunities to be very, very intentional about wanting to have those futures where there is more of that purpose, that kind of upper level of the mixing board, to be able to then have that open space to be able to make choices about how can we actually go beyond just merely collaborating to fulfill what we've always been doing versus let's now collaborate to do things differently. And that was really what we were aiming to trigger, as Bob said, an open conversation about how might we collaborate differently to be able to create better futures for working and living.
I think another important part of that is augmentation. In the next 10 years, we're going to see some amazing tools become available that will really support the concept of the office-verse. I mean, we have some already, and they're only going to get more interesting, that will help people collaborate and create what a friend of ours named Tom Malone at MIT calls superminds. And that's the name of his book. And the idea is you can bring the right people together no matter where they are and facilitate their ability to work together. And this is all going to be the result of a technical augmentation.
Who's a cooler crowd to hang out with than you guys? Every time I talk to or listen to content from one of you, I'm learning so many things, and then I think I have a handle on it. And no, I learned so many things in this webinar. We have so many more questions, and I have so many more questions, even myself. I mean, we could go on and on. There's one last one that I think, for a couple minutes, maybe Christine, you could reflect on, which just foray from what Joseph was talking about. This question really is for you. What's your view on whether planet should be prioritized, before ahead of people, as in planet, people, then profit?
Right. Well, that's the question I was actually talking a little bit about at the beginning. Yeah. And someone commented afterwards, well, if we don't have a planet, forget about the people.
True.
And I think it's very hard to say one's more important than the other. I mean, they're both critical. And making sure we have a planet clearly has to be very, very high on the list. And but the concept that Bob was talking about in terms of belonging and diversity and understanding that we are going to actually be better because of the diverse people that we work with and interact with. We'll have more creativity. We'll probably find better solutions to our climate issues if we get that diversity of talents working together. We have to remove the boxes, as Bob has said, with full spectrum thinking. We can't put people into boxes. We need to think about the broad range of the kind of talent we need. It doesn't matter, because we have the tools, it doesn't matter where they are or when they are. We can bring all that together to really have much more creativity for solving the problems of our VUCA world.
It's so true. With diversity of people, you have diversity of perspective around any problem or, opportunity. So without question, I want to make sure that we have time for any closing thoughts before we end the stream, before I ask any more questions, because I know there's so much that we could dig into. And hopefully some of these folks will have a chance to connect with you all, whether it's through LinkedIn or, I know there's a couple ways to connect with you guys and IFTF to keep in touch, to, have some resources. Any closing thoughts?
Mo, if I can build, Christine, the importance of diversity of thought. Mario, you gave us a nice compliment, how much you've learned. We've learned an incredible amount from yourself as well. Over the next couple of weeks, each week we will be having a deep dive with an expert on the spectrums. So, for example, Bob, you had mentioned in the context of the chapter on belonging, we'll have a conversation with Ibrahim Jackson on the topic of outcomes. We'll be speaking with Marina Gorbis. Next week on purpose, we'll be speaking with Professor Lonnie Brooks. And this is really to this intention, which having a conversation or having a different conversation about the workplace. That was the initial impetus for writing the book. And we really do need to give a big, big thank you and shout out to USM's President and CEO, Alex Sharrow, who said to us, hey, we don't need just another forecast. We don't just need to know about the future of the workplace. We want to create a new conversation. So in that spirit, we're going to be having these talks. In addition, we encourage everyone to reach out to Suzanne or myself to get more information about joining the Office Shock Council. That's part of our Vantage program. And you'll see both the Office Talk list of events on our LinkedIn page and the Office Shock Council, in addition to all the other triggers for learning and thinking future back on the Institute for the Future website as well. So those are two really important resources to continue the conversation, because that's really what we aim to do.
I want to say one thing first before you, Bob. You didn't say one of my favorite things, which is futurists don't predict the future. Fortune tellers predict the future.
So the last word I'd like to leave with you all is that the Office Shock conversation, these 7 spectrums of choices, not to decide, in other words, to ignore these basic questions, not to decide is to decide. That this notion of Office Shock, it's a limited time offer. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity to rethink the basics of how, when, where, and even why we work, if we don't take this opportunity, it's going to shift back and create a normal which may be more going backwards than forwards. So this is a limited time window that we have to actually make our working and our living better.
Amazing. I want to say a big congratulations to all 3 of you, and also to everybody watching and our whole industry, whether it's office or real estate or a combination or somewhere on the outskirts. Just to be able to have access to this kind of information and thinking is so amazing. It really is. Shows us kind of the moment in time that we're at and all the opportunities we have ahead of us. You have some amazing encouragement in the comments too. So it sounds like you energized a lot of people for their day, and hopefully help shift perspective a little bit. So
Great.
Thank you, and congratulations to all of you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mario.
you, Mario.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully you get to join these 3 on some of their upcoming events. So with that, take care and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.